front line of policing is loud, but the voices behind it, they're a lot louder and I think, frankly, a lot more interesting. Hi, I'm Bob Plaschke, and this is First Response. This is the number one podcast that takes you behind the badge and uncovers real stories and experiences of first responders from all walks of life and the topics that shape public safety today. If you're curious about the guy or the gal behind the hero, and they are indeed truly heroes, and the topics that they care about, take a listen. This is kind of your front row seat to hearing some of the really interesting voices out there, and more importantly, the heroes. This podcast is sponsored by PepperBall, where I have the honor to serve as CEO. PepperBall creates non-lethal alternatives to guns police use to keep themselves and the public safe. Today, I'm excited to have a return guest. This is retired Colonel Frank Milstead. Frank was with me one of our first response podcasts a couple of years ago. Hopefully, I've gotten better in my craft. Frank's gotten a little bit wiser. At the time, Frank was running for sheriff of Maricopa County. Unfortunately for the county, he didn't win, at least in my humble opinion. But it means that he has got a little bit more time to talk to us today, as opposed to doing that. Our discussions last time were around, kind of running for public office and how does that feel and how's that different than being a police chief. I really didn't get a chance the last time, Frank, to talk about what I know you know a lot about and have done a lot of work for the state of Arizona. And as a reminder, Frank started his career at the Phoenix Police Department, was then the chief of police of Mesa, which is the second largest police agency in Arizona, and then was selected by the governor of Arizona to be the colonel of the Department of Public Safety, which manages all of the public safety assets for the state, all corrections, the state patrol, et cetera. So a fantastic position of which he took following his father, who was the first colonel of the Department of Public Safety for Arizona. So a wonderful legacy in that context. But Frank, we didn't get a chance to talk the last time about what I know you're passionate about, and that is technology in public safety and in policing. And we'll get to it in a couple seconds. Frank was one of the first people that that allowed unmanned or empty car drivers, kind of the Waymos of the world to drive on streets in Arizona. And he was the first to introduce Taser into the police departments in Arizona. So it's very technology sophisticated and experienced bringing new technologies out. So this is a long way of getting to my first question, Frank, and that is body cams was a massive innovation ushered in by Axon. And we've seen lots of body cams over the last decade, but they seem now to be even more important when dealing with police challenges. And I'll be specific to the ICE shootings in Minnesota, where you had body cam and you had other videos kind of all kind of emerging simultaneously. So looking at using ICE that ICE instance as a kind of a point of context, talk about what are your thoughts about body cams? Are they good, bad, ugly for policing?
So I'll go back to 2015, and I'm the newly minted chief of police in Mesa, and Axon was coming out with their first gen body cam, and I was very interested in it. I was the first department in Arizona to implement body cameras. The first one they had ended up being really not a good system. It was very cumbersome. It had wires, and it was a bit of a pain for everybody. So myself and my number two, Heston Silbert, we went up, met with Rick Smith at Axon, and we helped them figure out how to build Gen 2, and they have a lot of agility, and they got the Gen 2 camera out, and it was better, and they've had a couple Gen since. They're either on 3 or 4, but the philosophy was, because at the time, and I say at the time because I don't know that a lot has changed, public safety was under attack by the media, trying to exacerbate everything that law enforcement did and somehow turn the tables on law enforcement, and where the bad guy is always innocent or always not at fault, and the police are always at fault. And as you and I both know, the most that we can be at fault is 50%, but the media wanted to make us all responsible for the actions of others. And so I thought we should start recording these things with the body cameras. And my philosophy was everybody's politer when they're on camera. The cops are politer. The bad guys, if they think they're being filmed, are normally politer. And I don't know if that's changed over the time, but because they become more ubiquitous across the country, I think people are getting used to that idea. But the other instinctive problem, and this is one of ICE's problems, I think, is if you're going to record, you have to review. Because if you don't review, and I told my guys this because I made the sergeants at the time review 3 or 5 of every officer's videos each month. Because I knew if we did something wrong or we had a particular officer that continued to do something incorrectly, that it would end up in court, and I would be the guy sitting up on the stand, and they'd say, "Hey, Chief Milstead, how many of these videos did you look at?" And so you could get an idea that, Officer so-and-so was doing this incorrectly. And I would say, well, we didn't look at any of them. And that would just add zeros to their lawsuit. So they have to be reviewed. And with ICE, and the other thing too, here we are now 10 years later from when I started this, 11 years later. Actually, longer than that. I said 2016. It was actually 2011. I switched departments on you there. So it was 2011 that we put these in place. So it's been 11, 12 years later. Everyone's got an iPhone or a Droid, and they're recording everything. And as we know from our experience, that the video recording is only one representation of the fact. It all depends on perception of where you are and how you react to the perception of what you're seeing. The only constant in life is what actually happened, and that being the truth of what happened. But the vantage point of the photographer or the videographer has an impact on what you see or don't see, and we've seen it over and over again. But ICE's challenge is that they're under attack by the media and by politicians. And the body cameras is a good idea for them, but also leadership at ICE needs to tell the men and women making these arrests, not only do you need to record these, but if it's going to be fantastic in some way, if it's going to be something that is going to draw a ton of criticism, stop what you're doing, rethink how you're going to arrest that person, and make it palatable for the public, and make sure you do it in its safest way. And we watch with Renee Good and with Purdy that there was videos of all different types of angles on those things that everyone was very, very quick to judge. And I hesitate again to say, if you're going to review, take your time and review, and keep your statements and your comments close to the vest until the investigation is complete.
So I think the takeaway is they've gotten a lot better. They work, but they being body cams, they come with the responsibility of the department to review them and review their people's actions, and learn that when you're on camera, to your point, you need to be thoughtful about how you act. And so, do you?
Well, and not only is that the issue with that they're good. The downside to them now is they clip them to their chest on a vest or a button, and they only see what your chest would see. It doesn't move with your head. Your hands get in the way. They're compromised because of how they're used today. And remember, the original ones, they had a camera that were on a set of glasses, or they put it on the bill of their cap, so the camera moved with them. And they tried to make sure that the camera was not more effective or more sensitive to light. than the human eye, because they didn't want the viewer of the video to see something that the eyeball couldn't have caught in that particular environment. So there was a lot of complications in the beginning, but the being clipped to the chest, you see when they're driving, you see the steering wheel, you don't see outside the window. And a lot of times if they've got their gun out, all you see is the gun in their hands and you can't see what they're looking at. Now you do get the audio, but you don't get a real true perception of what's happening.
So it's an example of, it's better than it was. It's getting better. It's not perfect, but I do think it's a big step in toward the way of transparency. And
it really is a good step in that way, because remember, the things evolve. I remember, like right now, when I started policing in 1985, we didn't have DNA. We didn't have, we had Polaroid cameras. We had fingerprints, we had tool marks. And you would use fingerprints and tool marks to put somebody at a scene. And then you had some video that would come and it was grainy and it was bad. And then even when we would go to domestic violence, our first thing with domestic violence was, instead of just writing a report, we had to record the interaction so we could submit the recording of the guy saying, yeah, I just beat the hell out of my wife because she burnt the meatballs or whatever it was. But instead of just taking the officer's word for it, they wanted to hear the audio of your interview. So you had those recordings, and then then we had DNA, and then nobody wanted to convict anybody if they didn't have DNA evidence. So, DNA, and now we go to familial DNA, and with generations of cameras. So technology is what the world, the media, the people, they want to see more than just the officer's word at this point. Where back in the day, my word was golden. Now it's like, well, yeah, but do you have a video? Do you have the DNA? So they want more than just the word of the officer.
Yeah, no, I mean, it used to be trust. Now it's in trust and verify, but now I don't think there's much, unfortunately. I think now 56% of Americans would say that they don't fully trust their the police function, which is unfortunate.
And you can thank the media for most of that. I mean, they flipped the script and they want to make the cops the bad guys, and which is always kind of ironic to me, because the first time that something goes wrong in their life, the first person they pick up the phone to call is the cops. When Nancy Pelosi's husband was getting the hell beat out of him with a ball peen hammer, he didn't, ask for a counselor or the fire department or for somebody from the supermarket to came. They called the police and hopefully, and they arrested Mr. Ball Peen Hammer. But it's, it's bizarre to me that people want to feel badly for people who do stupid things and suffer the consequences of them. I mean, and that's kind of the rule of policing. We never get invited to good stuff. Nobody ever says, hey, we're having a party or it's football, and they stop by and check out the game. It's there's a fight, there's a burglary, there's a dead body, there's a drowning, there's something fantastic has happened in somebody's life and they invite us. We never, it's never, hey, it's turkey on Thursday, come on over.
No, and by the way, I couldn't agree more. And that's one of the things where I think, civilians, people like me, that their interactions with police only are when they absolutely, it's their worst day, and they hope that worst day never comes, and they hope, it might be once or twice in their lives, and therefore they don't have a lot of what I would call familiarity and empathy with police officers. That's kind of part of the reason I do the podcast, frankly.
Yeah, and then you look at that review piece. We talked about that with ICE. So we've had this this logjam with the funding of DHS, and part of that logjam being unjammed was putting cameras on these ICE agents. And again, I don't have any issue with that. And the next part of it was there ought to be some sort of review. So and I would hope that the other part of the aisle, the Democratic part of the aisle, would say, well, we got cameras and it's being reviewed, and we have a little bit more accountabilities. They wanted names on the shirts and they wanted them unmasked. And I could go on and on about all the way I feel about all of that, but if you're gonna put a camera on somebody, you have to you got to review some of it so you know what's going on, or you have to have a system that can do that for you. But ICE, they're in an winnable situation with politicians and media right now, as long as everybody hates the guy in the White House, in those areas, and because they don't want ICE to be successful, because that makes the president successful, and that's a whole nother political talk show. But what everyone needs to remember is, these men and women are putting their lives on the line and trying to remove people at the orders of their leadership and superiors. And even though the quotas that were put in place are probably, again, something that's a bad idea, it's still been done. And so let's video, let's review, let's go after the worst of the worst. Let's make sure that we're getting those bad guys out of our neighborhoods.
Well, I know, and I think it's fair. It's completely fair to say, if you've got an issue with the strategy, if you have an issue with the approach, take it to the people that issue the strategy and the approach,
Correct.
Not to the officer that's just trying to, do what he's been asked to do.
You don't rough up the bagger at the grocery store because steak is $18 a pound. You quit shopping there, or you go to management, but it's not the bagger's fault. He's just putting the steak in the bag. Nobody roughs him up or her.
I do love your analogies. Having said that, let me be a bit, I don't know, take the devil's advocate position. Couldn't ICE do a better job of coordinating with local police and not, in effect, these tactics themselves? And again, I'm not accusing the local ICE officer. I'm just, stopping people on the street and on the suspicion of being an illegal alien versus having verifiable information that they are and they're a criminal and you're going to go get them. Isn't that a bit kind of puts them in harm's way to some degree, because it doesn't seem to be manageable in that sense?
Bob, I couldn't agree with you more that you need to do a better job of how you take people into custody, because again, if you're telling the population, hey, we're just doing the worst of the worst, but then you say, well, when the worst guys with some other people that aren't the worst of the worst, but we think they're illegal, we're going to take them too. Just the whole, in my opinion, the whole thing hasn't been communicated well to the men and women that do the job or to the American public. And you also need to have people that are trained. I built the Major Offender Bureau at Phoenix PD, and we trained the women and men of that unit how to go after fugitives, how to go after those who were wanted in a local crime or a national crime. They were seasoned, experienced, and if I, as the leader of the group, would have said, hey, and by the way, not only do I want you guys to go after these major offenders, but I want 300 a day. And I think the number that the White House gave ICE was 3,000.
3,000.
Yeah, that's unachievable. And it's all it does is it pushes people to do things that they normally wouldn't do, trying to keep up with the quota. What you tell them is go out and get them off the street, make sure they're safe, you're safe, don't get people hurt. Don't put yourself in a situation that is so fantastic that it's going to be exacerbated by anybody. And if it is, let's make sure that we've thought about it. And, I laugh, I think at times in leadership. I remember being the chief in Mesa, and one of my guys came and said, hey, they were going to go pick up one of the Hells Angels at the clubhouse on church night. And church night was Thursday in Mesa. And they wanted to go over to the church night and pick this guy up on a warrant. And I looked at him, I was like, you guys are crazy. Why would you go pick him up at the clubhouse? I mean, you know where he lives, you know where he shops, you know where he buys his beer, you know where his girlfriend lives. Find someplace other than the fact that there's, 45 other Hells Angels there. And they looked at me like, oh, come on, boss. But they were just wanting to make an example. And I understood what they were doing. And I think they finally understood why the hell I wasn't going to let them do it. So.
Yeah. Well, for a minute there, I thought you were going to be. It was like they were going to go to the church social, but the the clubhouse.
No, church is, they call it, that's what they call their weekly meeting. They call it church. It's not actual church. They're not praying or asking for forgiveness. It's just what they call their meeting.
Um, you know, on that note, we talk a lot about on this podcast about police being put in situations that are difficult. And you talk about, to your point, these ICE agents being asked to do a mission that's not easy, and the quotas, creating that kind of that unnecessary tension. Thinking about policing more generically, police now, when you started, I doubt you had to deal with as much mental illness or addiction or homelessness, but that now in some places is more than half of the calls that police take. Is that the right answer for police to do this? Is that what we should? I mean, or we just have to kind of expect it and then try to deal with it?
Well, so I think it's a much bigger question than what the police should or shouldn't do. I mean, if you go back 40 years, the federal government funded mental health care for the nation, and everyone had a state hospital, and there was services for those who had problems. Now, obviously, what they were doing 40 years ago with the war on drugs didn't work, because you can't fight with a plant. And you have to figure out a way, if you're going to have a war on drugs, is through education. And if you look at the education piece that Ronald Reagan did in his 8 years in the office with the Just Say No campaigns and all the other stuff, they were able to combat drug abuse by like 55% nationwide. And today you don't see the Surgeon General or the Office of National Drug Control Policy doing anything to dissuade people from drugs, other than now the president is blowing up drug boats, which is kind of cool. But it's just more prolific, and there's more of those people out there, and the population is increased. But even when we go pick up people on mental health detainers, because of HIPAA rules or laws, if I send one of my people out to go pick up a guy, he's a danger. All it says is he's a danger to himself or others. And it doesn't say he's making, handguns or long rifles or building bombs in his basement, or he thinks that, when the litter box the cat uses, that those are treats. You don't know what makes him a danger to himself or others. You just know that there's some problem. And so it is a complicated area for police. And we also don't equip police officers with implements to deal with mental health issues. We give you steel handcuffs, we give you a gun, a taser, we put a bulletproof vest on you, you have a nightstick, and all of those things are counterproductive to taking into custody someone with a mental health issue. And then homelessness, it really kind of depends on where you live, whether it's kind of allowed or not, because there's a lot of very liberal cities in this country that that do not want to deal with that. And, and there's cities that you and I used to go to and enjoy, and now we kind of steer away from them. Like, I don't really want to be in Seattle or San Francisco because or Portland, because it's gone downhill. They don't police that or take care of the issue. And then the local governments don't want to fund those problems either. And so it ends up being a police issue, which ends up being fantastic, again, to the media, because they don't like the way that the police deal with these people. But we really, even though we give them some training and we tell them how to use verbal judo and talk to them, we still don't have the equipment to take into custody or to deal with this enormous amount of people who either have an incredible drug problem or have some sort of psychological issue, or a combination of both.
Well, I mean, and by the way, San Francisco's gotten a lot better. So the next time you're,
I feel bad. I know you live right next door, and that's like your hometown. But the last time I was there, and it's been a while now, so I will stand down. But I haven't been to the Tadish Grill in years, because it's my favorite Italian food anywhere. My favorite cioppino. But I don't go, because I don't go to San Francisco anymore.
I'll need to get you out here, because it had the credit to Mayor Lurie and the San Francisco Police Department, which is a PepperBall customer. So I'm happy to shout them out. They're doing a much better job than they even 2 years ago. Dramatically different. But to your point, these are major issues. And I try to explain to friends, I'm like, hey, a police officer might get 1-2 days, maybe a week of training in terms of how to deal with mental illness and mental challenges, but that's nothing compared to a social worker or a psychologist who goes through years and years of training and years of interactions under supervision to be good at it. To do. It's impossible. It's just impossible for a police officer. Well, they can be empathetic, but it's impossible to assume they're going to be effective. All they can do is to try to control the situation.
No, they're not. The cops are not clinicians, and even if you had clinicians out there that had this training, you still can't let them just crawl back into their tent or their box or whatever it is and leave them alone. You still need to take them somewhere, extract them from that, and then they have to be wanting and willing to do that to find the panacea to whatever their problem is. But there's no there's no place for them to go, and it's just an incredibly complicated and unfortunate issue. You look what Phoenix PD did with Central Arizona Shelter Services downtown. They put shelters, they gave them mailboxes so they could get their mail. They did all these things, and it just became a new place for those same people to hang out and not get better. And I think if it was solvable, if somebody knew how to make all these people better, that it would have been done by now. But it's just overwhelming, and it's a problem. And I can't imagine it going anywhere. But they go to Phoenix is hot in the summer. People don't want to be here, and San Francisco's cool, but they don't go there anymore. I understand. But I'm just messing with you. But it really is. A lot of it is climactic in nature, where people hang out and want to be homeless, and what's available to them.
It's again, and this it's a repetitive theme on this podcast, and is that there's a number of what's it called, an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure, and unfortunately, the policing function in the United States is the last kind of the safety net. It is the cure, and it's an expensive cure that generally doesn't work well. Back to your point about the Phoenix example. Switching topics, I want to go back to technology because looking back over your career, Frank, you've done so many innovative things: taser, body cams, automated, or what is it called, autonomous driving.
Yeah. We did 2-finger fast ID in cars too when people didn't have ID, so we didn't have to fight with them or drag them in. We had to put 2-finger in and get their fingerprints and figure out who they were with that. We've done a lot of those things.
So now looking at policing today, here's the question: what is one tool, one kind of innovation that in policing that is oversold, that's being overhyped and may not kind of pay the dividends? And what's one that's still not getting the respect that it deserves?
So it's interesting, and I got to be a little careful with this because I got friends who are doing a lot of legislation and selling a lot of this. But and again, it's getting good reviews, but it's the idea that information sharing is the panacea to all regional crime problems. And there's a lot of companies selling these alleged single pane of glass where you can find out what everybody's doing on all over the place. But what you find out, in my opinion, again, and there's some very good stuff out there that is helpful. I won't say it is not helpful, but it is helpful. But the idea that you can do all these things a lot of times just overload you with more information than you can use, or it distracts you from dealing with what you do know instead of what you think you need to know. And I hope that makes some kind of sense. But there's a lot of those systems out there that believe that they can solve crime or predict crime by giving everybody all the information from the region.
Well, and of course, by the way, there are AI startups, AI startups in this space. And I think what you're talking about is it says, hey, let's capture as much as we know about the home address that you're walking into, and let's capture it from different agencies, and let's put it together, as you said, on one screen on a single pane of glass, and let's then try to draw inferences about what might be there, right? If there's been 2 warrants delivered to that house, and there's been they're behind on their utility bills. Excuse me. Does that tell you something?
Well, and again, it's premise history is always important for any call that you go on, but it's also that you have all these regional reports and arrests, and the thing that's good, and I think the thing where information sharing becomes good, are these regional fusion centers that people are putting together. They call them real-time crime centers now instead of regional fusion centers, but the fact that they have detectives, hopefully, that are trained, sitting in a room together from disparate agencies, when a crime goes down, and they're using, video from their cameras on the street and from around. I think all of those things are very useful, and I think they grow in popularity. And you talk about something that has only seen the beginning and probably not getting hyped enough, but it is growing very, very fast, is the drone as a first responder. And I think
you like that one.
Oh, I do, very much so. I think, I've run a lot of air units. I've run a lot of regional state aircraft aviation units, and they're very, very, very expensive. And people that fly those things are expensive, and they have to, it's to have a drone and a drone operator. And as those laws start to become more user friendly to law enforcement, there's certain things where the drone had to be within eyesight, and it had to be here and had to do that. As the FAA and policing and the government get together on this, having a drone show up somewhere overhead before you can even get there and start, people start telling you what's going on, I think will be very, very helpful as it is now. And even when the bad guys decide to use drones to do bad things, which is going to be a huge problem over the next 10 years, counter drone operations with our drones will be very important. Well, how do we disable another drone that is trying to attack a sporting event or a parade or a music festival or whatever it is? That's going to grow like crazy. And if you're a kid right now and you're wondering what you should do, you should go become a drone operator, because there's going to be a lot of jobs for those people.
I was at a San Francisco Giants game in San Francisco, where the homeless issue
where the homeless people are.
But the homeless issue's been well addressed.
I'm sorry, I think you said hometown. I apologize. I didn't realize you said homeless. That's on me.
That's it. So, and we were at the Giants game, and it was the opening night, and they had I think like probably 100 drones sitting outside over the bay, and at the kind of the national anthem, these drones all released a little cloud simultaneously, and the cloud was in the shape of the United States flag, and it was beautiful, right? I mean, it's like it's like a huge, the size of the baseball field flag in the air. And everyone was, I think kind of, I guess, excited about it. And to me, now knowing what I know about, unfortunately, what bad guys can do, that was kind of scary, right? You had 100 drones in the same population with 30,000 people, all that can deploy a little bit of smoke. So I think you're right. I think drones have been a bit undersold. And I think, to your point, they provide what police really need, which is real eyes on the ground. Information's great, to your point, and background information is helpful, but eyes on the ground, situation awareness, and knowing what you're walking into has got to be the to your point, the better answer of those two technologies.
Yeah, it's going to be paramount. It's going to be a lot less expensive. I mean, there's cities now that are parking drones across the city and putting them in a box. And even Scottsdale PD here in Maricopa County, they have a system where the drone responds, goes out, gathers information. When the battery starts getting low, it comes back to its box, it lands, it offloads the bad battery, puts on a new battery, and goes back up. I mean, all that stuff's going to get better and better, and as battery technology gets better. But you have a huge point. If you can do 100 little puffs of smoke to make the American flag, what else can you do 100 puffs of to damage, human life and compromise things? It's and I was down in Times Square, and there was a drone that was there, and it literally was being sold to disperse an aerosol, like almost like you were going to use it for why can't I think of what they call those planes that do the crops, like a crop duster.
Okay.
But this thing would do aerosol, and I'm thinking, to me, it was like, why would you have this in downtown New York? Why would you even show anybody this? But anyway, those days are coming, and we're going to have to deal with it. That's why I'm going to stay in the woods and stay away from all that. So
you'll stay away from San Francisco and any major metropolitan area.
Well, I was going to make some snide remark about the Giants fans, but I actually love baseball, and I don't want anything to happen to anybody's fans, especially now that the game's going faster and I can actually watch a whole game.
Under 2 hours.
Yeah, I don't nod off anymore.
As always, I just love chatting with you, but we're a bit behind or a bit over time. I have 2 more questions for you.
Okay, I'll keep it short. I understand your direction.
Looking back, you think about what we covered today, and we've talked about, privately. What part of modern policing, what part of and all of the improvements that policing has made that the public doesn't understand, that it still doesn't get, after a lot of efforts by policing to try to communicate? What's the one thing that people listening to this should take away and say, I really should think about that?
Well, I was going to throw you a bone and tell them they don't understand PepperBall, but I think, and I don't think they do actually, but the answer that I would give you is to believe, first off, that police officers will lie and cover for other police officers. I think, I'm not telling you it doesn't happen, but it's not systemic. And to believe that there's systemic racism in law enforcement, that they're always out to get somebody. All of those things are, untrue. I spent 36 years in uniform. I worked, and I think it's actually one of the benefits of policing or being in the military or on a team is law enforcement is made up of people from all walks of life. My car partner for the first 3 years of my career was African American, and he's today still one of my dearest friends. And you see racism out in the street, you see problems, but I've never, and I'm not saying that there's no cops that don't hate somebody from some walk of life. I mean, because that's just the human dynamic. But to think that it's systemic, that white cops want to do bad things to people of color is insane. And because nobody gets this job to victimize people. We all put our lives on the line, and we all get dressed every day with a bulletproof vest and put a gun on. It's the only job in America where your friends get murdered at work, and I can list my friends who got murdered or killed in an accident at work. It's not the job you do because you want to get one up on somebody or do something. So and again, I'm not telling you it never happens. I'm just telling you that it's not systemic. And that the women and men that go out to do policing, they're really good people. And it was interesting, I went from being a municipal guy to a state guy, and states are even more interesting because a lot of times, you have people that work in these way off hinterlands of the state. I mean, we covered everywhere from the Grand Canyon to the Southwest border to the Navajo Nation. And those young men and women who get stationed in, nowhere, Arizona, they become like the regional expert on so many different things, on impaired drivers, on drug detection. We give them a canine. They're there. They're great counselors. They go to the schools and spend a lot of time in the schools talking to kids. They're just really, really powerful positions when you give somebody a whole section of the state where they're kind of the one cop or the one of 2 or 3 cops that are always there in those areas. So,
yeah, I think that's. But I think you're. I think you're right. I think it's, I think 30, 40 years ago, people wouldn't have made those judgments. They wouldn't have raced to those kinds of conclusions and stereotyped police in that context. I think they would have actually stereotyped them in the completely the opposite way, which is, this is the Irish cop on, running the beat. That's,
Right.
That's your uncle, or, it's a friend of your family. And I think because policing's become a bit more ambiguous, more depersonalized, people can then now apply these stereotypes inappropriately. And I think you're completely right. And I tell everyone, I said there's bad lawyers, there's bad bankers, there's bad school teachers. Generally, they're always the minority, not the majority. And in 90, every police officer I've ever met, I've never met someone has been fit that stereotype, and I don't expect that I will.
No, and just kind of, and one more 30-second piece on that is there's it takes a certain type of person to want to do this. I mean, it really is that man or woman that wants to give back to the community, do something for the place that they lived, and it's not fair to use a broad stroke and judge them, just as you may get a bad diagnosis from a doctor, but it doesn't mean all doctors are morons or they all get bad diagnoses. It just means that you got a doctor that missed something. And I'm not telling you that cops don't make mistakes, because we do. But that's just, again, the human dynamic. We all err at times.
Well, sadly, I have to ask you the last question, which is, my first repeat member on the podcast, is we'd love to make a small donation in your honor. What charity can we make that donation to?
So I don't remember which one I did the first time, but it would surprise me if it was not Make-A-Wish, because Make-A-Wish is near and dear to my heart, as you know. And if I did it the first time, I'm still doing it the second time. And I'm going to tell you it should be Make-A-Wish, because those are young people that need reasons to feel they're loved, and they need reasons to fight for their life and for their family. So Make-A-Wish.
It was Make-A-Wish the last time.
Okay, I thought so.
This was and for the folks listening, the Make-A-Wish Foundation was started. The first Make-A-Wish recipient, so to speak, was a young boy suffering, who's going to soon pass away, whose family asked if he could be a police officer for the day, and they went to Frank's father, who obliged, and he thought that was a good idea, and they started doing it on a repetitive basis, and that was literally the basis for Make-A-Wish Foundation. So
yeah, Chris Gracious wanted to be a state trooper, and they made him a state trooper here in Arizona, and he's buried in Illinois, and it says Chris Gracious, Arizona State Trooper, on his tombstone. And he died about a week after he was made a state trooper, a motorcycle trooper, actually.
Yeah. That's the right thing to donate to. Folks, I always love talking with Frank. It's 40 years of expertise. And what I find unique about Frank is that he is an innovator. He is, from the first positions of leadership that he had, even now, he helps police agencies bring in new technologies, learn and evolve and grow. And there, as he said, there comes bumps with that, and there comes more work with all of those new technologies. But if you think about body cams, you think about drones, they're all coming to make policing better. And it just says that this industry is innovative. It's not the cop with the billy club on the sidewalk. Today is another good day for first response, and I appreciate you guys listening. I'll tell you, we are the number one podcast that takes you behind the badge, and in this case, Frank's badge. And hearing from Frank and other police officers about the topics that shape public safety today. I'll say thank you to PepperBall, because they sponsored this podcast, and I have the honor to be the CEO there. And PepperBall creates non-lethal alternatives to guns that police use to keep themselves and their public safe. So until next time, we'll be signing off, and look forward to seeing you on the other side.